Hello there, everyone. Andy just dropping in before the interview with Joanne Mitchell, which I hope you enjoy. We'll be discussing quite a lot about the upcoming US cinema release of Broken Bird, but in our excitement, I believe we neglected to talk about the upcoming VOD release for UK watchers. So, should you be in the UK, you will be able to watch Broken Bird in the comfort of your own home via Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, Google TV, and more, I'd imagine, following shortly after from May the 7th, 2026. So, set your diaries and check that out then. For now, enjoy the interview. Bye.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to a special episode of the Horror Hangout, a podcast where film fans gather to talk about the best and worst of the horror genre. In this very special episode, I am joined by director of Broken Bird, Joanne Mitchell. Joanne, how you doing?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for joining us. I said just before we hit record, we did meet very briefly in like a whirlwind at Fright Fest a couple of years ago when you had the first screening of Broken Bird, and we now meet again on the precipice of it getting a US cinematic release April 24th. How do you feel?
Wow, yeah, it's been quite a journey actually. I feel very excited, feel very nervous as always. As you know, it was a wonderful experience to have it open Fright Fest a couple of years ago, and now, yes, it's about to open in the USA. And yeah, I feel excited. I feel grateful. I feel very, very nervous because it's starting all over again. I thought I got over all of that, and now it's starting all over again, which is brilliant. Which is brilliant. Yeah, I'm very grateful.
I'm so glad to see it going. I know time kind of flies by. It doesn't feel
Yeah,
like it was 2 years ago that we were
yeah, it was.
sitting down and watching it in Leicester Square, and now we're seeing this go international as well. Um, we'll dive into a little bit more about Broken Bird, its creation, your hopes and dreams for it going forward. But let's take a little rewind, if we may, first, and let the people listen along know a little bit more about you as a filmmaker. You have worked on both sides of the camera in your career, but before we even get into your career, talk to me about your experience of horror as a genre. Where were your sort of early interactions with the with it?
Yeah, I suppose my earliest interactions with horror were when I was really young and a group of friends had a VHS, shows my age, a VHS tape of The Exorcist. And so we sat down one afternoon and had to be sort of relatively quiet because I think their parents were downstairs and there's about five of us and we were watching this horror movie in their bedroom. And I just remember just being it blew me away. It blew me away on so many levels, not just because it was horrific and graphic and all of those things, but it was so possible in my head. It was so possible and so realistic. And I always had this kind of a fascination with the occult. And I was, at that age, I was about sort of 12, 13. So I wasn't that far removed from Regan's age. So it kind of it sort of left an indelible mark on me. And I probably couldn't sleep after that for about 5 years. It was ingrained in me. And then my husband had a copy, fast forward, and he said, "Oh, look, I've got this copy. It's like a director's whatever cut of The Exorcist. It was a DVD." And I said, "Well, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. I don't want it in the bedroom. I don't want it anyway because I had a bookshelf in my bedroom." So that was that. And then I thought, I need to go back to this film. I need to readdress it. And I watched it again and I just thought, what a brilliant film. How wonderfully constructed. It was so clever. The shots were amazing. It was in camera, most of it. I just thought, this is brilliant storytelling. And the characters were relatable, everything. So, hats off to Mr. Friedkin because that stayed with me. I mean, I've seen lots of horror movies since, of course, but that was the one that really, a bit of an obvious choice, but it's the one that really struck me.
Hey, you don't need to apologize for an obvious choice here. I always argue, like, when people say things are vanilla. People like vanilla because it's delicious. It's a good flavor, the same as The
Yeah,
Exorcist when it comes to horror, right?
I mean, yeah, but it pushes all of those buttons, doesn't it? It really, the characters are great, the horror's great, the fear's great. It stays with you after you've finished watching it. There's a lot to unpick there.
And I love the mention of this. I think people of our generation, I would say, particularly have this great time to have been growing up with genre cinema and horror, particularly, I think, because there is something that feels that little bit illicit about this. Like, here's a videotape that your friends had, because we grew up in an era where people had access to these technologies and technologies that you could copy and you could get things off the TV when you weren't
Yeah.
supposed to, because again, we live in that wonderful pocket generation where anyone older or younger than us is incapable of getting a printer to connect to their phone or getting a
Yeah.
VCR to be recorded off to plan like the timing of a recording. And that gave
Yes.
us access
Yes.
to all this wonderful technology. And we also grew up in an era where you have a lot of information available to you, but unlike now, you cannot Google to find out the making of this thing. So it does give you that little bit of plausibility of, is this a real thing? Is this bait? Like, how much of this could happen?
Yes. And I think what is really excited about those days, sort of growing up in the 80s and 90s, is that you had to go out and find your film.
Hmm.
You had to talk to people. It's not, as you just mentioned, it's not on a screen, a tap of a button. You went to the local video store, and your eyes would start to glance up at the top shelf where all the horrors and the 18s were, because that was sort of, out of bounds. And if you could get one of those films or get your older brother to get one of those films and bring it back and you could watch, an 18 certificate film, it was just so exciting. And you close the curtains and it was all dark and it was brilliant. But now it's, as you said, it's easy. You just have to Google it. You can, quickly pay for it, but you don't have to make that effort that we used to have to do. And talk to people about films, talk to go into the local blockbusters or the video shop and say what recommendations do you have, and you'd have this conversation and it was engaging and it was visceral, it was brilliant. So yeah, we were very lucky.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe we'll still see it. I feel like we are maybe on the precipice. It could go either way of us
I
getting
think so. Yeah.
people getting in. Now, whether it is through shops and things like that, or maybe it's an expansion of things like the library system where you'll have these, or clubs or things like that. I met with some wonderful folks this weekend just gone who run the Glasgow thing up in Glasgow, as the name would suggest, where they have a monthly get together where people, a good group of people, all get together to talk about films like it's a book club and things like that. I think we're seeing a lot more
Mhm.
social engagement, particularly around genre cinema. So I think it's an exciting time,
Yes.
different from how we had it, but I think
Yes.
I feel very positive about where people are going with particularly horror cinema.
And I think that's right. I think with the advent of things like Letterboxd as well, I think that really helps the younger generation engage with films, not just now, but way back. My son is 18 now, so he's a real cinephile, and he's like watching stuff again. The Scorseses, the Coppolas, all the films which are real classics, he's watching and watching again, and then he'll go out to the cinema. Whereas, 4 or 5 years ago, it was really declining. I know this, let's not get political about it all, but the cinema sales are, they're not brilliant, but they aren't as bad. Well, they're getting better since COVID. But, in saying that, as long as a film is well advertised, I think that's the one thing that it needs, in good marketing, then people will go and see a movie because there'll be a buzz about it and they can talk about it. So I have I love going to the cinema. I love going to the cinema. I love that experience that you can watch collectively some,
Yeah.
a story together. You're not talking, but you're watching it. There's no distractions unless somebody's on their phone or whatever, but there is no distractions. You can't just press pause and go and get a cup of tea or
Go and get
something.
a drink. You got to be
Yeah,
there. Yeah, you got to be
you're
there and get in
there,
it.
and you're watching the story in it, you're engaging with it. And I think that's something that is so, so important.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
why festivals, I think, are such magical places as well, because so many like-minded people who've gone to the effort to go and see this experience on
Yeah.
screen, and especially when you're doing things premieres like you did at Fright Fest,
Yes.
um, you know, something that none of you have seen before,
Yes.
and you're going to experience that for the first time, possibly with the filmmakers right there, or to answer your questions directly afterwards. Um,
Yes.
so a wonderful experience growing up. Um, how did that begin to translate to your life, in entertainment, in as a filmmaker, as an actor as well? Did
Yeah.
horror sort of stay with you? I know you haven't worked exclusively in horror.
No, no, I think no, I haven't worked exclusively. I was always very much into sort of character-led drama and stories. Um, However, I started off as an actor, but I thought that that time when I started out, that was the only way I could get into the entertainment business, shall we say. It wasn't nowadays it's very different, but then it was I didn't know anybody in the entertainment world, in the film world, in the theatre. I didn't know anybody. So my natural progression was to go to drama school and become an actor. I always loved telling stories. I always loved that part of it, reading, writing, although I was never, it was just nothing that it was something that I just didn't think was possible for me at that time. And then it was, funnily enough, it was more after I'd had my children that I wanted to stay at home more, that I was now sort of, exploring writing. And my other half is a big sort of horror genre fan and a real cinephile actually as well. And he was always into horror and he was very much into zombie films. And I couldn't get my head around zombie films because I just thought it was like people running out. He was always watching the real sort of B movies, zombies and stuff. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I just said, oh God, why are you watching this again? And he said, okay, well, why don't you, if you can do something better, you do it. So I was like, right, okay, that's a challenge. And so that I wanted to write something sort of more character based. That was what I knew, but incorporate the horror with it. And so that's how we then co-wrote Before Dawn, which was our very first horror movie, which was made for a can of Coke and a packet of crisps. It was dead cheap, but it was so much fun. And then I just really got the bug because I really felt like you can go anywhere in horror. There's such a wonderful platform to tell a story. It's so elastic, it's so freeing. And for me, then I just started watching more and more horror. And I suppose what I loved about it was all the subgenres within horror, that there's, all the, there's zombie horror, there's slasher horror, there's elevated horror, there's supernatural horror. I mean, the list goes on. And it's all very well supported. The audience are there for you, especially as you mentioned in film festivals. They're all waiting, they're wanting it to be fantastic. They're really behind it. The support in the horror genre, I think, is really quite incredible. It's a real sort of family, I feel, especially when you go to festivals like Fright Fest and, Glasgow Fright Fest and all up and down the country, Abattoir, Sheffield, Screamfest. All it's just brilliant. Um, so yeah, I really engaged with that. I really engaged with the people, and it was like it's just fun, and I like the fact that stories are character led and they're based in truth, but you can also have the the allegory of the fact that the horror is um, it can sit within the horror genre, but there can be themes within it that can be compelling and interesting to people
Yeah.
who are watching it.
I think the horror genre more so than almost any, like particularly one of the ones that until quite recently gets overlooked at the serious awards and so on, is such a mirror that held up to society. Like
Yeah.
we've done, we're rapidly racing towards 500 episodes of our podcast now, and I never thought I would have, we have fun, we joke about the silly things that we see on screen, we talk about the scares and the visceral reactions you see on there, but I've had more discussions about the societal messages in films which are overtly quite silly. Sleepaway Camp, The Leprechaun, Frankenhooker
Yeah.
actually have far deeper meanings than at surface level you'd expect
Yeah.
them to have. So I think it's a tremendous genre. But
Yeah.
hearing your story there, you're almost right in there. If I was working for a tabloid, which I'm not, I'd almost have to say like Joanne Mitchell got into making horror to win an argument with her husband in the
Yeah,
first
well, it
few.
is. It is actually. I mean, he would say that. It was kind of it was a strange sort of turn of events, but it was, it was a happy
Yeah.
turn of events just because we had such a good fun. We filmed it in 2 weeks and we had a really great sort of skeleton crew and from that we got, interest for the next film and it sort of it bled on from there.
And I don't want to undersell like your particularly some of the things you worked on in your career for anyone not familiar or who doesn't have IMDb permanently in their hands when listening to something like this. Joanne, you've worked in a lot of like really tightly scheduled, constantly running almost programs over here in the UK. I've seen Casualty and Doctors and
Yeah.
Emmerdale to your name over the
Mm,
years.
mm,
Now, we've been talking about this with some recent guests as well. I don't think it can be understated the skills and the exposure you must have had to having to improvise, to get things done, to overcome barriers, to, with the teams you've worked with there, to get things in the can and ready to produce and
mm.
ready to get out there on the screen. That must have been tremendously helpful for the work you've done in horror as an independent filmmaker now, just working with those teams that I imagine have to overcome a lot of hurdles when you've got a weekly schedule you're running to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think it's the speed in which you have to get these um, your dailies filmed is quite incredible when you're in serial drama, anything like that. I think when I was doing, I think I did an episode of Doctors, and I think I had to do, and it was quite a while ago, I think I had to do 12 scenes in one day. So there was no, it was just, banging it out. And in a way, I quite enjoyed that because there's no time to sort of sit down and have a cup of tea and think about things too much. They had to get it done. And there's no time for ego in any of this. Everyone on that floor has got a job to do and it has to be done by this certain schedule. So there's no time. So get on with it. And I think it's a really good training ground. For making films actually, and I think a lot of actors will say that. I think Margot Robbie started off, for example, sorry, I mean, I don't know her, but I heard that she started off in Home and Away, was it Home and
I
Away?
believe, I mean, Home and Away is a breeding ground for some of the
Yes,
biggest
exactly.
actors we have today,
Yes,
right?
exactly, exactly. So, and that's that's speedy. It's like any other Emmerdale, Corrie, all of those Doctors, Casualty, they have to be fast. And I think what then helped me was then working in very sort of micro budget movies where you're kind of wearing many hats because you haven't got the money to have lovely HODs in various different departments. So if you're co-producing something, you've got to be prepared to step in to being a first AD or making the teas, production managing, all of those kind of things, so that it works and you get a film.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in micro budget filmmaking and working in serial drama, fast TV is a really good way understanding the craft um, and the skill, I suppose, because all these people who work in these different productions are incredibly skilled and they're so fast that there's no time. There's no time to think about things too much and be, throw a hissy fit about whatever. It's very liberating.
Yeah, I guess great skills that you pick up, and I imagine a great number of contacts and friends you make along the way who you can call on for advice when you start doing these things yourself as well, right? You must have worked with some tremendous people.
Yeah, yeah, amazing people, really amazing people. Gosh, so many. And so many really great actors as well. And there are so many actors who really want to be part of the indie scene as well. You've got someone like we work with James Fleet in Wolf Manor and in Broken Bird. And he was just phenomenal. He's a veteran, incredible actor, but he loved it. He loved being part of this sort of indie world as well. He's done big, big budget movies. Um, so I think if the material's there and the crew and the people are good, are cool, then it makes for a happy, joyous experience.
And I think we can fly the flag for horror and genre film in general here as well. When you see people who clearly really engage with it, choosing to come and take these projects, two prime examples that came to our minds quite recently with their appearances, actors like Elijah Wood, who have clearly, and Daniel Radcliffe as well, people who have clearly done large franchise things, which, are not their accountants, but I imagine if they didn't want to continue working, might not need to try so hard to do it. And you see them choose these roles, sometimes not tremendously large roles, but in great, really sort of evocative genre
Yeah,
cinema,
yeah.
and you can see it on screen. They're having the times of their lives when they're getting to be in these two examples, creepy little guys sometimes.
Yeah, it's time to play, isn't it? It's time to be creative and play and use your imagination. And there's no boundaries, you know. It's great. It's very liberating and freeing.
So let's not bury the lead any further, Joanne. Let's talk a little bit more about Broken Bird. Our listeners in the UK will have had the opportunity to see it. We had some screenings back in the sands of time a few months ago now, but it's now time for our friends over in the US to get a chance to see it at cinemas. So again, April the 24th is your release date. For those who haven't experienced it before, we follow the story of a mortuary assistant who she likes a few things in her life. I saw from the details that Greg sent over that she loves poetry and dead people.
She does. She does. Yeah, she's well, I think it's a very character-led piece. And we see the film is really from Sybil's perspective, although a slightly skewed perspective. It is deeply rooted in her own truth. And I suppose from the tragedy that she has suffered as a child, that has influenced her decisions in her life. I'm not saying, that would influence anybody else's, but it's influenced hers. She is a strange being. She is many things. She is, messy, dark, enigmatic, nuanced. I mean, as you know, as you've seen, Rebecca Calder does a phenomenal job with portraying Sybil. I mean, I struck gold when when I cast Rebecca and she agreed to do it. So I think it's a journey. I think it's a compelling journey. I think um, my my wish is that the audiences really do feel compelled and they do go on that journey. But they also, you know, they are interested in who she is and why she does these things. It is macabre, it is dark. She does some terrible things, but she's not an all in and out
Yeah.
villain.
you can't help but I think there are moments in this film, and I'm not going to do any narrative spoilers as we go through here, but I think strength of, and it speaks to your background, I think, in character-led um, drama and character-led stories, but also in, Rebecca's performance there as well. As you say, she is responsible for some terrible things in the film, but you still like her, and
Mm,
she can still be very funny in
mm,
moments. You are absolutely, particularly in some engagements that she has as the film progresses in the mortuary, she can flip from hero to villain in this conversation, and you understand where she's coming from. Obviously, there are things that you could absolutely, as a reasonable person, not support her. Oh,
and you shouldn't.
you've taken this a bit far,
Mm,
Sybil. Maybe we should
mm,
we should have an intervention for you at
yeah,
some point here. But you bring across a very complex character. That, in the same way as I think, not the same marketing budget behind it as and Juggernauts, but if I can draw parallels with people who are listening, imagine the essays you could write, the conversations you can have about some of the most famous villainous characters on screen. Think of your Hannibal Lecters. In fact, you can make a defense case for these characters because they've had things happen in their lives, because there are things that work about, and you can have someone who does terrible things who is still very compelling. And I think you see this on screen
mm.
with this character. Let me dive a little bit into your casting again of Rebecca Calder, who we've now seen since Broken Bird in some huge Hollywood roles, right? So she is in, most notably for horror fans, of course, the most recent at time of recording, uh, Conjuring
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
As we were saying, we'd love to see a bit more of her in that movie, but she has I think, one of the scariest scenes in the film when she's in the kitchen as the mum of this family. What was it like working with Rebecca? And did you know, my goodness, you're going to go on to big things when you were working with her?
Well, I suppose it started in the casting process because I didn't actually I couldn't I was in Belgrade at the time, so I couldn't get back to London to cast. So everything was done over tape and then Zoom. And we had some great actors who auditioned for the role. But with Rebecca, she had this quality, and I've said this before that I just remember when she was doing her tape, I started actually leaning into the screen. I could physically feel myself leaning in and into, and I wanted to know more about this person and who she was, although she was playing Sybil. Um, it was very enigmatic, and I thought that's what I need. But also what she did, which was the sort of cherry on the top for me, is that she did her audition instead of doing it in a Yorkshire or a generic Northern accent, she did it in a Northwest accent. Um, and I'd recently been filming in the Northwest, and I do have some friends from the Northwest, and the accent is so friendly, and they're such
Hmm.
friendly people. They just have a smile on their face, and I thought, God, that's brilliant because it's this sort of friendliness, this kind of this quality that she had, but it hiding this interior of what's going on, this depth and the layers and her character. So those are the two things that cinched it for me. And I was really pleasantly surprised, obviously, when I met her when she flew over to Belgrade, because we had like 2 weeks to go before we had 2 or 3 weeks to go before we started filming. Um, and she was wonderful. And I think we didn't have much rehearsal time, but Rebecca she's very thorough as an actor. She almost does like a Bible of her journey of who the character is. And she was asking me every single question. So we'd go out and we'd just talk for hours because there's not a whole lot in the script about who she was. We get a glimpse of what happened to her as a child, but there's a gap to fill in. So, I said what I thought, she said what she thought, and I said, look, you use what you feel because I feel that it's now time for you to spread your wings. And she did. And she was so, she's such a real person. She's very honest and very truthful. And I think that's what is the key to Sybil. She's not playing a villain. She's playing someone who is real, and it's emotional truth. And that's why your heart sometimes breaks for her. Unwittingly, your heart does. And I suppose there had to be an element of trust from her as well, because she does do some pretty bad things,
Yeah.
shall we say. Um, so, we talked that through and why she does it. It wasn't just in there because she does a bad thing. We weren't trying to be sort of gross or anything like that, but she had a reason why she did that. Everything was truthful to her. So, so it made it, a lot easier for her as an actor to grasp, I suppose, Sybil. But it's all kudos to her because she is an incredibly talented actor, artist, and a really amazing, beautiful person as well. So, I definitely struck gold.
Oh my goodness. I feel like we'll be clipping this out and sending it over to the board if she ever wins an award. You'll be playing
Yeah.
over the big screen.
I hope so. She deserves it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, me watching this as an audience member coming out of this film, it was what really struck me as we began watching this film, and I think really does almost immediately hook you into this story about what's going on here. And in the film's quieter moments, you're just invited very much to what is she thinking at this point, and what is she up to next? It's one of those times, isn't it? Like when you're watching, it's like, when you just watch a film, you think, I just want you to be okay. Just
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's what I wanted. I wanted people to be when they walked out of the cinema, hopefully, and they will do so maybe in the States. I'm hoping that they keep thinking about it.
yeah,
It stays with them for a little bit. And, why does she do those things? What is going on? That's to me, that's important. There's films that do different things, right? You can go in and be completely entertained and come out and feel great and blah, blah, blah. But with this one, I wanted a little bit of everything. I wanted there to be that sort of dark humor, that macabre quality,
mhm,
that gothicness to it, but also, you know, it's a universal thing that that we all suffer from to a varying degrees. And I hope that that gets taken away as well, that people who are different, who find it really hard to connect with other people, who find it hard, to be in society, um, that they're human, you
yeah.
know, they all have everything, and we shouldn't just disregard. I think that was yeah.
Yeah, like paying attention to that person you pass on the street, I think, and wondering what's happening in their day is, I think, a
Yeah,
really powerful message that you can have because you never know, like, what the most unassuming person has going on.
yeah.
One thing I'll be particularly interested to say, and Joanne, I'm not going to ask you to predict the future here as well, is that I always wonder when we look at British filmmakers in particular. Do you have any expectations or any feelings about how it might play differently in the States to here? Because it's a very strange thing. We have a common language apart from all their incorrect spellings. But societally, we can be quite similar but different to the US. Do you think there are things that may or may not resonate differently with an American audience versus a British one, or impossible to predict?
I mean, my gut feeling is that some states in the US will be appalled, maybe because of some of the things that happen. But I think on the whole, I think it is very story-led as a piece of cinema. And it is character-led. And I think the themes within the story, as I've mentioned before, are universal. We all have ways of dealing with certain things, particularly with death. Some people get over it. It might take a while, and some people just never do, and it stays with them. And we all have different ways of dealing with that. And this is what I'm just sort of playing with, really, not playing with, but I'm working with, shall we say. And I think, you know, I also wanted it, and I think I've said this before, I also wanted it to be have an entertainment level
Hmm.
that, there is those kind of moments where you laugh and you think, oh, I shouldn't be laughing, but it is quite funny because it's quite shocking. But that's great because I like to go to the cinema and be entertained, but to be really taken on an emotional journey. Um, so I hope that's what it can be viewed like when it goes over to the States. I suppose, it is very British. Yes, it
Yeah.
is very British. And I suppose some people will really engage with that quirkiness.
Yeah, I mean, so many things. That's what makes things popular and stand out, right?
Yeah.
In some cases, and we hope in this one.
Yes, I really hope. I think it's got a lot going for it. I think it's got the quirky humor. I think it's got the dark macabre. There's a gothic element to it. I feel like it's got a strong story, amazing characters, amazing actors. All of them are really wonderful. I was blessed with all the actors. Um, so yeah, and I think, visually I'm really happy with it. We had a great team of people. We had some great VFX guys, as you saw at the end, with what
Mhm.
happens at the end to her and what she's surrounded by. And an amazing cinematographer, and I was really happy with, how they really understood my vision because most of the crew, aside from not being able to speak much English, some of them didn't speak any English, had never really been to, well, I don't think any of them had been to the UK. So it was really important that, you know, I had to kind of express very clearly in English to Serbians how I wanted this film to be
And that's
perceived.
so impressive that you're able to put those things across. Because again, I have lived in the UK for the majority of my life. There's a great method you bring this, and I'm not sure. I'm not technically minded enough to know if it's the way you choose the color grading or the way that you light these things, but you could have told me that was a park in, the sort of north of England that someone was
Yeah.
walking through, and I would have absolutely bought that for you. I guess in similar ways to, the good folks at Spider-Man are making us all convinced that Edinburgh is New York City right now. But like, sorry, Glasgow, let's get it right. But like, I think tremendous work in putting those things together. And I think, again, for as much as I can get behind and understand the technical side of things, what I think you really successfully bring across in screen is there are moments in some of those externals where I, as a person that lives here, I can feel what the weather is like in that park as they're walking through because I've walked through those parks in exactly that type of weather 1,000 times in my life, and you can feel what that is like when she's having those conversations. And there's a piece with a mother in a pushchair where they're walking through. You
Yeah.
feel that is like an autumn day in the UK, right?
Yeah, and I was lucky, because if I'd have filmed this in the summer in Belgrade, it would have been a totally different
A
situation.
beautiful 25-degree day.
I've got it, yeah, 30 odd, it was so hot there because I went out there in I think I went out there in September, and then we didn't start filming September, October, and it was quite warm. It was unseasonably warm. And I was thinking, oh my goodness. And then as soon as we started filming, October, November, I think it was late that the autumn colors of the leaves were changing. But it was perfect because that gave it that sort of autumnal, very British vibe. And I was quite obsessed with bricks and stones and roads. Um, because for me that's a telltale sign because
Mhm.
in Yorkshire it's very grey and the slate it's very slaty and the Yorkshire stone and the wet stone and the green hills, so all those things were really important, and it took a while, I have to say, to find all of those. But an amazing location team who were really patient with me and very persistent, and they were just really wanted it to be perfect. So, I was really, really lucky.
It definitely for me all came across on screen. I hopefully like our friends when they get to watch it will get to experience the same and get that authentic vision that you wanted to come across. But it's lovely to hear you talk about it because I think when you go in, you consume a film as a piece of entertainment. Yes, absolutely, people can understand there's a story to tell, but I think sometimes you can just forget how much effort goes in to make something not appear jarring when you have it on screen and to make these things come to life in a very sort of authentic way. Joanne, I won't ask you to sell it to the people, but what I will say on your behalf, if you'll allow me, is people who listen to this around the time of release, if you want the chance to go and see Broken Bird when it runs, it's a limited run. It's not going to get the same sort of runs as your Marvel movies do. So go and see it early. If you enjoy it, go and tell your friends about it. If you're not in a location where it is screening, get onto your local cinema manager. Give them a call to your local cinema chain. We have just had a great example of what we can do when public engages with a film, with films like Iron Lung, made by a YouTuber for £2 million and went absolutely gangbusters, managed to top the box office charts. If you're listening to this and it sounds like something that's your cup of tea, get in and see it early so people understand there's an audience for it. This helps films that get a limited run get more screenings booked in. And if you would love to see it but you're not in reach, an email to your local cinema chain cost you nothing but your time. Get involved, eh? Get and support some independent films.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's great. Yes, thank you for
Um,
saying that.
Amazing. Well, I will leave you shortly to get on with your day. Two, the most important questions that we're going to cover of all, though. If people have encountered you for the first time here and they want to follow up with what you're working on next, where else they can catch your films, see what projects you're working on. We can't take social media for granted anymore. It's not what it used to be. Where is the best place to keep up with you for news?
Well, at the moment, probably Instagram. I use that. I'm not brilliant on social media, but I do have my Instagram account at Joanne Mitchell B. So I will try and remember to put stuff on there. But yes, I am working on other projects. They're all in various different stages of development. So yeah, watch this space.
More to come, and I won't get you to break any embargoes here, but still sticking with horror or branching out a little
Um,
bit as well. You're
yeah,
allowed
no,
to.
yeah. I mean, they've all got the dark element to it. There's one which is a dark fantasy thriller, and then there's a sort of more supernatural thriller. One which is a bit more thriller, supernatural comedy. So yeah, there's a few spinning plates. But yeah, I like the dark and the light.
Sounds exciting. I guess the good thing is you're not. It's not incumbent on you to do all the posting on Instagram because I imagine now you have a profile there. When you've done something, people will tag you in it, so people will talk about you on there as well, which also
Hopefully,
helps
yeah,
people get there.
yeah.
Amazing. And then I did promise no difficult questions, but there is one that we're going to
Oh,
come up here. Now, we know a horror fan, a horror film maker. We're doing a podcast called The Horror Hangout here, so I'm going to put it on you now. People have got in touch. Your friends have said, "Hey, Joanne, it's horror night. You're a horror filmmaker. We're coming to your house for this, and you're going to choose a movie for all of your friends to come round and watch a horror movie for an evening with you. What are you choosing to put on for them?
the first one that comes to my mind, and it's just come into my head, so I'm going to say that.
Do it.
It follows.
Great choice.
I
Incredible choice.
love that movie. Yeah, so I'll put that one there. It just came into my head straight away, so I have to use it. I didn't think, so that's the one. I love it.
That's what
Yes,
we
great
need.
movie.
Instinctive
Yeah,
reactions. And again,
lots going on.
yeah, great things going on. There are some proper heart in your mouth moments when terrifying things come. I think it's a great film, for example, for things which are that linger on screen. It's not a jump scare movie. This is like a real sustained terror movie, and it's brought
Yes,
some great new names into the public consciousness when it comes to horror. And sequels coming at some point.
Yes, I heard. Yes, I'm very excited about that. And it's the lead girl's going to be still in it. What's her
Right.
name?
Yeah.
Oh, her name's
I'm
gone
go
out of my head.
I'm gonna have to pull it because I've also got the same fade, and then I'm going to be like, of course I know exactly who this is. Uh,
Micah
Micah
something.
Monroe.
That's it.
There you go. I did it without getting on IMDb, everybody.
Teamwork.
Teamwork. We did it. Amazing. Well, I'll say it one more time for people who are having to try and type this in. If you're in the US, you will find Broken Bird at cinemas April 24th and the days surrounding that one going forward in time. How long it is depends entirely on you, everybody. So go and get it watched. Do share it around, independent films that appreciate it.
And we do have a Q&A event in Glendale on the weekend of the 24th. I haven't got the exact date, but that is pending.
If you're in
I will
Glendale,
be there.
you know where to be. Go and give Joanne a warm welcome over there.
Yay!
Perfect. Joanne, thank you so much for taking a bit of time out of your day to hang out with me. All
Pleasure.
that is left for me to do is thank everyone who has listened, of course. Thanks to our old mates at Acast for hosting the show, and thank you to the wonderful Taj Easton for our theme music. My name has been Andy Conduit-Turner, and it will continue to be. And I will see you all next time. Bye for now.